Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Jeff and Roberto. Roberto, if I could start with you first. Just following up on what Damien Green was asking about. I mean, it is striking the difference in your evidence as the Music Publishers Association and the evidence from the Independent Music Publishers Forum, in that you've just made it clear to the committee you're reasonably happy with the state of affairs, and the Independent Music Publishers Forum has called the split from streaming in the evidence they sent in a gross disparity and inequality, and another phrase they used, they said it was scandalous. Why is there such a difference between the MPA's views on this and the views of the Independent Music Publishers Forum?
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. We represent a broad church of independents to large international publishers, from sole traders all the way through to the biggest companies that exist. And the common consensus on our board is that we're moving in the right direction. Clearly we'd like more, as we've suggested, but we were at a dynamic of 10 to 1 at one point. We're now down to, going by the figures that's been suggested today, at 3 to 4 to 1. So just by that alone, we are moving in the right direction. And the submission that we've supplied is really to fight for the things that we're asking for, and that is to combat piracy. Piracy now hasn't been fixed through streaming. Streaming's obviously made it. The market was so down from 2002 to 15.
We're going to get onto piracy, and I don't want to take away from other people who are going to ask questions about that.
Sure.
But what I wanted to know was, I mean, you as you described, obviously you represent the big publishers who also are part of the same corporations as the big labels, and you also represent smaller publishers. Do your smaller publishing members agree with the Independent Music Publishers Forum that the current split is a scandal? Or do they agree with the view that you've outlined to the committee?
I have to honestly say I've never heard it being referred to as a scandal. Clearly I hear different points of views, and we all want more. Okay. And we are moving in the right direction. I mean, I've not heard anything as concrete as what you've just said to me.
It's in the evidence that was submitted to the committee, so I'm just quoting from the written evidence that they submitted. I mean, sure. Is it unfair, the charge that's put, that the fact that these days the majors own most of publishing, as well as the most of the recordings and the record labels, that unduly influences the views that are put forward on publishing and suppresses the value of it's their job, as Joni Mitchell put it, to stoke the star maker machinery behind the popular song. The popular song itself, is its value being suppressed by the fact that those who are stoking the star maker machinery, i.e. the record labels, also own the publishing?
Obviously I'm not party to the record labels' commercial arrangements. I haven't encountered or seen anything. I've heard conspiracy theories in the 20 years of myself being in the business. But, the major publishing companies are helping to push the rates up in the forums, the other forums that I sit in on different boards. And in music publishing, we're fortunate to represent loads of, up to the company I actually work for, we collect up to 20,000 different source types. So, music streaming is one element. I can only say in the forums I'm sitting with these major companies in, they're absolutely helping songwriters collect better rates from other sources of income when I'm at the table with them. So okay. I can't speak for the major labels with their digital deals.
Okay, Rupert, that's fair enough. Can I just ask you one other question? I asked Jeff a few questions, and that is, what do you make of all the activity that's going on at the moment with companies like Hypnosis and Mercuriadis and others buying up, future income streams of songs? What's the view of you as head of the Music Publishers Association on that? Roberto, did you hear my question?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was to Jeff. Apologies.
No, sorry.
My voice...
What's your view? Did you hear the question?
So I had the question with regards to Hypnosis acquiring copyrights.
Yeah. What's your view about that, and what that means for the business, and what the implications are for publishing?
I think it demonstrates the long-term value of song copyrights, to be honest. And it equally enables songwriters to choose what they wish to do with those with their songs. You know, it's always been a competitive marketplace. Acquisitions of copyrights have taken place prior to Hypnosis. Clearly, you're seeing some big headlines at the moment because people are recognizing, particularly through this COVID era we're in, that the value of songwriting and music publishing is very strong and will sustain growth over a long period of time.
Okay, thanks, Roberto. Jeff, as you know, over many, many years, I've argued very strongly in favor of intellectual property and in policy changes to ensure that the music industry can protect its copyright and combat piracy and so on. But is it fair to say that as the Chief Executive of BPI, your role here is really to represent the interests of the majors in lobbying Parliament and government?
Absolutely not. The BPI, we have 450 members, most of whom are independent music companies of all shapes and sizes, frontline labels, catalogue labels, classical labels, etc., jazz labels, every genre and every business model. And you know, we engage very, very closely with them. We listen to their views. They have 50% of the seats on our board, 50% of the votes around our table, and they're treasured by us. And we run a lot of programs specifically for the indies, like the Music Export Growth Scheme, which raises grants for indies. The Mercury Prize is very important for the independent community that we took over some years ago. And we do an awful lot of training and other services specifically for the indies. So no, not in any way. We try to promote the interests of the recorded music sector as a whole, which includes the independents and the majors and the artists.
So there was a story when the major UK heads of the majors appeared before us that that lobbyists had been employed to coach them before they appeared before the committee. That wasn't something that BPI was engaged in, was it? Or did you employ any lobbyists for them? Or?
We certainly spoke to the majors. And yeah, we discussed all the issues that were likely to come up before the committee. And frankly, we wish that on the Indies panel that you'd invited some of our Indies to give evidence, and we would have done the same with them, because obviously.
Well, in fairness, the majors are getting a go. You're getting a go. AIM got a go. And
that's fair enough.
I think that's fair enough. It's only fair we have both sides of the arguments. Have you engaged any lobbyists yourselves as BPI on this inquiry to try and influence events?
To try and influence events. We've got professional advisors who, will advise us on media, who will advise us on policy issues. That's kind of not unusual for us.
Is that in relation to this specific inquiry?
We have instructed a firm in relation to this inquiry who are helping us on media and just understanding.
Are you able to tell us who they are?
I think it'd probably be fair to write to you with that. That would be okay.
All right. Okay. Jeff, you know what the general charge is that's levied, and I think it's only fair you get a chance to answer it in front of the committee in the industry. And broadly speaking, it's the charge tends to be that there's a lot of opulence, for major record label executives and the industry lawyers and lobbyists and so on, but not sufficient of the income that's generated. And as I said to you earlier on, I've always been very much in favour of trying to grow the size of that pie by making sure intellectual property rights can be enforced. But the general charge is that the income generated by music creators doesn't get down, enough of it doesn't get down to the creators itself, the singers, the musicians, songwriters, and so on. Obviously the lack of live, as we said already, has really brought sharply into focus that streaming isn't bringing a lot of money down that ecosystem as far as perhaps it could go. That's the charge, the opulence versus austerity. What's your answer to that as a executive within the industry?
Sure. Simply that we wouldn't agree with the proposition that not a lot of value is flowing down from streaming. The streaming market is growing, as you know, very robustly year on year. In 2019, for labels and artists, it generated £629 million. That's growing every year. And the number of artists, as I said before, who are benefiting from that is increasing every year. So, of course, to go back to one of the chair's observations at the beginning, you have artists who are critically acclaimed, who are fantastic artists musically, and who have a great live following, but for whom streaming income represents only a relatively small proportion of their income. But that's perhaps because for those artists, not every genre is heavily streamed. Not all artists have fans who necessarily engage heavily on streaming services. They might do well through physical sales, they might do well through selling merch, absolutely through selling live. Artists' incomes have always been a mixture of all of these different areas. But streaming is growing really well, and our biggest concern, it has the potential to get us back to the levels that we were at with the height of the CD sales and beyond it potentially, but only if we allow all these positive dynamics of competition and free market and investment in A&R to continue. And that's what we would like to see, because if I could just finish the thought, we really believe that that would be by far the most effective way of increasing artist earnings, would be, rather than to redistribute the existing pot of money in some complicated way, to grow the amount of money coming into the industry and then ensure that it flows through.
You see, the thing is that we can have Mercury-nominated artists who, as you say, are struggling to make their rent, as we've heard, but you're comfortable with the $593 million share bonus for the top 6 executives as a result of the Warner IPO, or the $120 million remuneration package to the top 5 executives at Warner Music Group in 2019, which is actually the entire revenue of the top 27 tracks in 2019. I noticed that in 2017, total directors' emoluments at BPI were only £724,779. Do you ever feel you should have gotten to a more lucrative part of the music industry yourself, Jeff, based on those figures?
Well, perhaps like a lot of people in their jobs in music, I was probably guided by my interests more than how much money I could make and my passion for music. So I'm very motivated doing what I do. In terms of remuneration for executives in the industry, I can't really comment. That's their issue, not really anything to do with the BPI, other than to say these are major global corporations with huge responsibilities and very large companies, and it's really not for me to comment on how they're paid. But what I do want to see is British record companies and record companies generally making a profit, being successful, because that's what leads to growing investment in the next generation of talent.
But why is it? Well, let me say this though, Jeff. But why is it unfair? Because we are limited on time. Why is it unfair though for artists and songwriters, to complain they aren't getting a few more crumbs from that extremely heavily laden table?
Well, I think the industry's investment is what has driven British music's success over the last 60 years. The fact that we've got such an incredibly successful recorded music industry that's popular all around the globe is because we take more risks on artists. We invest a higher proportion of turnover, 25% in A&R in this country, than in virtually every other country in the world. And that cycle of taking risk on unknown artists and spending heavily on marketing, spending heavily in the recording studios to make the best album possible, etc. That is what has driven the success of British music. And that requires companies and capital to come into the business and to take risks. And that is what we're keen to preserve, because we really believe that ensures that the most artists benefit.
Do your figures on A&R include royalties that are paid to artists?
They include advances, which is, I think, 50-something%, the costs of production, so recording costs, video costs, tour support. That counts for, I think, almost 90% of it.
And just finally, Chair, before I finish, the issues around competition and the industry and the way that it's become very vertically integrated. I mean, we've talked about the fact that the industry did have a big dip in revenues when piracy came on board and digital came through. And we talked about executive rewards. I mean, the idea is that the industry is only about the size it was 20 years ago. The executive pay is not the same as it was 20 years ago, though, is it? How does that stack up?
You're trying to pin me on executive pay. I don't even monitor executive pay. That's really not my principal concern. My principal concern is the growth of the business and how much are we managing to create in terms of revenues from streaming, and how can we invest more of that every year into more
But
British artists.
if the pie's the same size and more of it's going to the top, then obviously that is the issue, isn't it?
I think the issue that has rightly been raised is there are artists who are critically acclaimed, as said, who are not able to earn enough money from streaming to support themselves. We want to see those artists earn more money from streaming. We truly do. We absolutely think some of the artists who've been complaining about it, they're talented artists, and we'd love to see them earn as much money as possible. But you can only do that by increasing the total amount that comes into the streaming economy, which we touched on at the beginning. And we have a series of policy measures that we'd like to put forward that we think could be very effective in achieving that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Back to you, Chair.